Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Monday the 2nd of August. I'll start with the coronavirus update before we get onto the programme itself. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 2,499,665 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. 2,152,660 have been confirmed negative and 347,005 have tested positive. There are 799 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all of those with symptoms will be tested. There was one new reported death of people who've tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the virus now stands at 7,943. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 407 were in hospital last night, 60 of whom were in intensive care. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, 4,012,496 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination and 3,214,801 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures up until yesterday show 129,743 patients who have tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 24 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Broadcasting Scotland regular Kat Cary, who I like to think is Broadcasting Scotland's American correspondent. How are you, Kat?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very, very well. It's nice to see you again. We have got an American story later on in the programme, but we're going to stick local for just now. In a series of social media messages this morning, Scottish Government Health Secretary Humza Yousaf raised questions about the admissions policies of a preschool nursery in Broughty Ferry near Dundee after his 2-year-old daughter had been refused a place, while applications from children with Western-sounding names received responses with offer of nursery places. Mr Yousaf said that the 3 white Scottish applicants were offered tours of nursery and spaces, often within less than 24 hours of applicants with Muslim names being rejected, including the application of his daughter. Mr Yousaf and his wife have lodged a complaint with the Care Inspectorate, asking them to investigate the nursery. In his Twitter thread, Mr Yousaf also said, "I cannot tell you how angry I am. As a father, all I want to do is protect my girls. Yet aged 2, I believe my daughter has faced discrimination. If this had not happened to me, I'm not sure I would have believed it could happen in 2021. How many other families has this happened to?" We have to stress that the nursery denies that there has been any discrimination. And obviously, until it's been passed to the Care Inspectorate, we won't know if any of the allegations have any truth. But I'm wondering, Kat, why Humza Yousaf is so surprised. I would have thought that people's names in Scotland are one of the things that often point to all sorts of discrimination, whether through race or religion. In the west coast of Scotland, people will make all sorts of assumptions about your religion based on your name, and that can often carry with it prejudice. Is he deluding himself that Scotland is somehow, a paragon of virtue when it comes to prejudice and racism?
I don't think that maybe his surprise was at how blatant it was, how easy it was. Sometimes you might expect something to not be, there's a low level. It's kind of like the best thing I can compare it to is like a low level of sexism. I was in the military, so there's just, a background buzz, as there is in everyday life. So maybe it was just like, I can't believe that it was this bad and that it was this blatant and that it was that easy for a white, these children with their names changed to be like anglicized or whatever, got in that easily. Maybe
yes, because some of the applications that he and his family, and in fact a journalist from the Daily Record submitted, were false profiles of children who were looking for the same number of hours as children with Muslim names. And it certainly seems that the ones with Scottish names or Western names did get offered places or tours of the nursery, and those with Islamic names didn't. One of the things the nursery said was, in their defence, was that they already had Muslim children at the nursery, that they catered for different diets at the nursery, and they even came out and said that the owner of the nursery was also of Asian extraction, which sounds a bit like the "some of my best friends are" name a protected characteristic that you're going to be offensive about sort of defence. There's a myth goes about in Scotland. I was watching social media unveil on this today, and people were rightly horrified and upset, as you would be, and saying, this is outrageous, Scotland isn't a racist country. And there's a real myth that somehow Scotland is less racist than any other part of the UK. But if you look at the British social attitudes study and look at their race reports over the past few years, there's really nothing to distinguish between attitudes to race and prejudice in Scotland than there is anywhere else in the UK. Does that surprise you, Kat?
No, I think as I've shared here before, my background is in psychology, not only just like meeting a lot of people and living in a lot of places, but I did a lot of psychological research. And, you know, sometimes it's frustrating and sometimes it's comforting for me to know that people are largely the same. So people have people have good intentions, people have their own biases, whether they're intentional or not. You know, there's certain levels of acceptance, but this is something that occurs everywhere. So the best thing to do is to recognize it and to try and, you know, do something to adjust, to educate the population. But, you know, change like this comes slowly. This is cultural attitude change. And I just think that if you say like Scotland isn't as racist as fill in the blank, that's exceptionalism, right? And that's kind of against what we're about, right? As Scotland, we're like, you don't have to be from somewhere to be Scottish. You're Scottish if you live here. So it doesn't make sense to me to say, well, we're less racist. You know, we can try and promote these values, but, you know, humans are human.
Absolutely. I think the one difference in Scotland is that there's no doubt racism and prejudice and sort of anti-migrant feeling in particular hasn't really become politicised. It's not a political football. Therefore, the media don't have anywhere to go to stoke it up. You know, the media do not reflect public opinion. The media create public opinion on the whole. And so when they don't see that there's any political benefit to be gained, they're not going to stir it up. So I think our media is generally a bit more neutral on this issue. And if anyone's interested in what the British Social Attitude Study says about race, it has never been less than 25% of people across the UK who admit to being very or potentially racially prejudiced. That's 1 in 4 people, so that's quite high. But we no doubt will find out what happens to the nursery. I don't know what powers the care inspectorate have to look into this, but I'm sure that Humza Yousaf will keep his Twitter feed informed about it. 1 in 5.
And the funny thing is that when they said diet, I know that there's a private nursery, but like nurseries in Scotland, state nurseries have an all vegetarian thing. So I'm not sure what they're getting at with diet.
I think they were saying that they particularly produced halal food for children who required it, and it is a private nursery, so they do have different, perhaps, standards or procedures than state-owned nurseries. One might ask why he's sending his child to a private nursery, not a state nursery, but that's another question. 1 in 5 businesses are planning on redundancies as the furlough scheme closes. Chancellor Rishi Sunak has been issued with a stark warning about winding down the furlough scheme and expecting employers to contribute more to their employees' wages. From today, firms will be expected to pay 40% of their employees' wages, which has prompted warnings from the British Chamber of Commerce that 1 in 5 businesses may have to make staff redundant as a result. There are more than 140,000 people on furlough in Scotland, and the British Chamber of Commerce is warning of many thousands of redundancies and a widespread skill shortage. Responding to that British Chamber of Commerce report, SNP Deputy Westminster Leader Kirsten Oswald MP said, "This is a stark warning from the British Chamber of Commerce of the consequences of the Chancellor rolling back the furlough scheme just as businesses are starting to find their feet again. winding down the furlough scheme now pulls the rug from under the feet of thousands of businesses in Scotland who are unable to open. Once again, furlough is being worked around the needs of businesses in England, with the needs of firms in Scotland being completely ignored. 1 in 5 businesses planning redundancies is extremely high. How could the scheme have been managed differently, Kat, do you think, that would have mitigated some of this risk?
I mean, they could have tried to mitigate the risk. I don't see much effort being put into mitigating the risk. I'm not an economist. That's not really my area, but I do think that there's certain companies, certain sectors who have turned more of a profit over the pandemic, and maybe they're not paying their fair share. I don't know if I've ever heard of an instance in the UK or in America where the multi-billion dollar multinational firms are paying their fair share. So, that's the first place I'd start looking.
When the furlough scheme was first announced, they were very clear that if you were on furlough, you had to be completely on furlough. You weren't allowed to work part-time at all. And then they changed that and said that businesses could employ people part-time, and therefore that would help offset the costs of them having to pay more into the furlough scheme. But it would have seemed a bit of a no-brainer, really, to say to companies who couldn't have their staff back working, and there are still some sectors who've only just opened, that really they should have been on 100% furlough. They shouldn't have been expected to contribute to staff's wages when they had no way of generating any income. So the scheme would have been different for different sectors, but that would have seemed fair, do you think?
Yeah, it would have seemed fair, wouldn't it? But, unfortunately, it seems like a lot of these things are designed to funnel more people into the benefit system. There's people who are working who are on benefits, and the benefit system is notoriously difficult to manage and get the payments, and it's just, it seems to be designed to turn people around in circles who need help, and it not with much of a mind to fairness, unfortunately.
Yep. Well, maybe it's something that Nicola Sturgeon can ask Boris Johnson, because the First Minister has invited Boris Johnson to meet with her next week at Bute House. In a tweet today, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, "I understand the Prime Minister will visit Scotland later this week. Since this would be our first opportunity to meet in person for a while, I've invited him to Bute House to discuss COVID/recovery. We differ politically, but our governments must work together where we can." It's understood that the Prime Minister is planning a visit to Scotland this week, but so far has not requested any formal or informal meeting with the First Minister or the Scottish Government. First off, Kat, is it ridiculous and is it insulting, actually, that the Prime Minister coming up to Scotland has not asked for a meeting with the Scottish Government? Wouldn't that be the very least respect that the Scottish Government could expect from the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think that would be the norm, and I think that oversight, seems very deliberate and very provoking. And it's good that we have a First Minister like Nicola Sturgeon who doesn't rise to the bait, because that letter and that tweet was very cleverly written to say, the ball's in your court, do the right thing.
Yeah, he's damned if he does, and he's damned if he doesn't. So if he does agree to meet, he'll come under massive criticism from unionists. And if he doesn't agree to meet, then the media up here will make an absolute meal of it. And it'll be his kind of version of hiding in a fridge up in Scotland, that he's just frightened to meet the First Minister. But if they do meet, Kat, and you never know, it might happen, apart from COVID and recovery, what else do you think might be on Nicola Sturgeon's agenda, or what should be on her agenda?
Well, I think the drug deaths should definitely be on her agenda, since this was something that's been this has been a Tory thing to say Scottish Government isn't signing up to, our planned recovery, which it's pretty rich because the Scottish Government has taken a different tactic than what the Tories are promoting. So it's obvious that, it's not without a interest in reducing drug deaths, and especially with the safe injection sites getting vetoed by Westminster, however long ago that was now, I think this is an excellent time to bring that up.
And what about independence? Do you think she might? After all, just this week at the weekend, Michael Gove said that the Westminster government wouldn't say no forever. Maybe she'll press him on a time when he might say yes.
Maybe, but I mean, I'm a big fan of soft messaging. I know some people like to say that, if you're not saying independence in the first sentence and last sentence, you don't care about it. But I do think that at this point, the SNP got elected and Nicola Sturgeon got elected on a manifesto that says COVID recovery first and then independence. So maybe while she'll broach it, if I were her, and I mean, she's much smarter than me politically. Let's not deny it. If I were her, I would sit back and I'd let him bring it up because he surely will bring it up.
Well, maybe viewers of Broadcasting Scotland could suggest questions to Nicola Sturgeon that she could ask Boris Johnson. I'm sure there'd be quite a few amusing ones. Staying with the Prime Minister, not something I'm usually happy to do, it's been discovered that he is facing a Tory rebellion over, amongst all things, hunger and poverty in the home counties. He faces rebellion from backbenchers over the Treasury's spending this autumn, as a high-profile Tory MP hit out at, quote, intolerable levels of hunger and poverty in his affluent home county's constituency, and urged ministers to abandon plans to cut universal credit. Steve Baker, a leading Brexiteer, an MP for Wickham in Buckinghamshire, called on ministers not to ignore the cost of living crisis faced by people in real trouble in constituencies like his, who have been tipped over the edge financially by the pandemic. Work and Pensions Minister Therese Coffey has confirmed that the pandemic universal credit uplift of £20 a week will be withdrawn as planned at the end of September. Coffey was known to have been uneasy about the end of the uplift and lobbied for its extension to September, but is now believed to be resigned that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are opposed to any further extension. The SNP Work and Pension spokesman David Linden MP yesterday launched the party's summer campaign to maintain the £20 universal credit uplift and extend it to legacy benefits. The £20 uplift has been a lifeline for millions and is currently preventing 500,000 families from falling over the edge into poverty. Mr Linden said it would be truly devastating for our society if the Tory government ploughed ahead with plans it knows will push hundreds of thousands of households, including 200,000 children, over the brink at a time when they need support the most. Tory ministers must listen to the many voices that have warned about the impact that universal credit crunch will have, including the fact that the planned cut risks wiping out the positive impact of the Scottish Child Payment and which it has on families. Now, while we must applaud late in the day a Tory MP recognising that the pandemic and other things, not least Brexit, has caused families real dire need, it's a bit rich suddenly for someone in the home counties to suddenly be kind of rattling his tin can and saying it's not good enough. If it hadn't landed on his doorstep, I don't imagine we'd have heard anything from Mr Baker, Kat.
Yeah, it sounds like he's nervous about keeping his seat to me. It's not so much about values, it's about how many people have come to him and said, we're not going to vote for you because, the Tories are very calculating, however you feel about it. So if enough people, say, we will not stand for this, specifically to their MP, they can get an arch Brexiteer to stand up and say, stop, or pay attention to this. It kind of makes me want to spread the word to other people in the whatever counties they live in to write to their representatives and let them know.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the home counties, if we're honest, the home counties isn't somewhere that you would imagine had the kind of poverty that you might see in other parts of the country, sort of the deindustrialised parts of the country. But I was doing a bit of digging about it, and apparently, and I do find the statistic hard to believe, but I believe it might be true, is that Buckinghamshire and his constituency in particular has the highest level of food insecurity in the UK. So what that tells us is there must be vast extremes of wealth, because obviously it's the stockbroker belt. I mean, there are extremely wealthy people live in Buckinghamshire. That's why it's called the home counties. And yet they've got this high level of food insecurity. So the next question is, why on earth do they continue to vote Conservative?
I think, and this is common in like where I grew up, in where people aren't as politically tuned in, is that unless it hurts you, you don't really pay attention to it. So I think a lot of people were just like, well, we don't want to pay attention, and this guy scares us. This guy doesn't, that whoever, what was it, Corbyn scares us. I don't want to vote for that Lib Dem lady, so I'm just going to vote Tory. And now that it's starting to hurt them personally, now they're threatening to vote elsewhere.
Or it's people who are not voting at all and just assuming that all politicians are the same and there's no point in voting. But that's really...
Nothing motivates people to vote like hunger.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you were right when you said he's probably worried about his own seat. And I find it tasteless, actually, when any elected representative only responds to a national crisis when their own seat is threatened or their own position is threatened. I don't know whether his seat is threatened. I don't know the size of his majority. But he obviously is prepared to come out and say something. But the other irony is he's an arch Brexiteer. So does he not appreciate that Brexit itself is contributing to the problems that people are having on top of the pandemic in terms of prices going up, people losing jobs? We know that we've just been talking about the number of people who might lose their job as a result of the pandemic. So it's like he has absolutely no self-awareness whatsoever.
Yeah, don't ever underestimate the power of people believing what they want to believe. And that's not just the public, that's elected members too. So he's been selling Brexit for so long, he might not have recognized what a role that plays in it. He might not even see the irony in the situation he's in. Denial is a powerful defense mechanism. I wouldn't call it great.
Well, I hope so. We did report yesterday on the Sunday programme about David Linden's summer campaign. And obviously the Universal Credit Uplift is something that Alison Thewlis has been campaigning about too for quite a long time. And I think we said yesterday that we thought there were something like 50 Tory MPs, backbench MPs, who were willing to kind of, whether we don't know how publicly, but who are certainly showing concern about this. But it's time that people, and this is maybe the job for the opposition, both SNP and Labour and Lib Dems, if there's any of them left in Westminster, I can't really remember how many there are of them, but to start making the point that austerity, which is one of the things that has led us to this position, didn't have to happen. Austerity is a political choice. So they really need to be ramping that up. But I'm not convinced, frankly, that this so-called Tory rebellion will continue. Do you think there's any chance that the universal credit uplift might be extended or postponed at all? Or is this just something the Tories will just drive through and really not care about at all?
I'm not sure. I don't know which Tories are agreeing to this because, not long ago, Boris Johnson sacked however many, 30 Tories, 20 Tories that voted against him. So I guess it depends on like how hard of a line they want to take this.
Some quite senior, a few ex-work and pension secretaries and some quite senior, sort of old guard Tories, if you like, old school Tories, I think, have come out. And I'm assuming, although I don't know, because all the names haven't been released, but I'm assuming some of them might be in the so-called red wall when they're realising that their constituents are suffering. And as we've just seen from Baker talking about Buckinghamshire, poverty, hunger, impact of austerity isn't related to only certain bits of the country. It's now across the country. In Scotland, obviously, there are attempts to mitigate where it can the impacts of these cuts. And one of the initiatives that has been part of that are the Best Start grants. Part of the Best Start grants are the Best Start food payments. And there's just been announced an increase in the Best Start food payments to help boost family incomes. They're increasing this month, marking the achievement of another commitment of the first 100 days of this government. The payment supports low-income families to buy healthy food for children under the age of 3 and forms part of the Scottish Government's national mission of eradicating child poverty. Best Start Foods is part of a package of 5 family payments administered by Social Security Scotland. They're made every 4 weeks on a prepaid card to buy healthy food, including eggs, milk, fruit, vegetables, and pulses. The payment is increasing to £18 from £17 during pregnancy and for any children aged between 1 and 3 years old, and it's also increasing to £36 from £34 for children under 1. Between December 2018, when the first payment started, and the 31st of May this year, 60.8 million has been paid to over 179,000 families for Best Start grant and Best Start foods, with 16.7 million of these payments being for the Best Start foods. Now, on the surface, Kat, this is a positive initiative, and you wouldn't think there was anything to complain about. But I'm a bit uneasy about the fact that the Best Start foods payments are given on a prepaid card and not just given as income. I'm concerned that there's potential there for stigma. And I'm thinking back to when asylum seekers were first dispersed throughout the UK. In the early days, asylum seekers' benefits were given on a card. They weren't given money. And even the Home Office agreed that that was causing stigma. It was creating a kind of illegal racket, actually, of these cards being sold to racketeers who were making a profit on them. And it was scrapped. And then they just start getting hard cash. So why do you think the government have agreed to give this on a prepaid card and not just make a payment to these families?
I'm not sure. There's in America they have a program called WIC. It's Women, Infant, Children, and so many people qualify for it that they hand out it used to be in like coupons, and now it's a card, I believe, where it wasn't technically food stamps, and it was kind of celebrated, and people that were, I can't think of, it was it's called middle class in America, but it's not the same as middle class here. But you could have a job and whatever, and you could still get this because it was focused on nutrition and making sure everybody, had a healthy start. So I guess it depends on whether there'll be a stigma. With immigrants, there's also, the difference of the name and difference of an accent. So I hope that enough people qualify for this that maybe they thought this is a risk worth taking, and that it wasn't going to actually end up in that. But, it's a valid concern. I really think that what you're saying is valid.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether people have been complaining about it. And these payments have been around for quite some time. Must admit, I hadn't realised until the story about the increase across the desk today that it was paid on a card. But what makes me uncomfortable about that is it feels like they don't trust people who are in receipt of this need to spend the money on what the government want them to spend it on. And, there's a whole kind of agenda and there's a whole narrative around people who are suffering from poverty, people who are on benefits, that somehow they're not responsible, that they're feckless. Now, many of these families who receive this grant will be working poor. I mean, the vast majority of people in poverty in Scotland, it's working poverty. They're working, they're just simply not earning enough, and they need top-up benefits, which is an absolute disgrace, and that needs to be tackled. So it just makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable that it's, the sort of thing when people say, oh, I don't know how someone on benefits can afford a nice phone or a nice pair of trainers for their kids. Well, why shouldn't be able to buy a nice phone or nice trainers for their kids? It's just suggesting somehow that people aren't responsible, and that doesn't sit well with me, and it doesn't really, I don't think, sit well with the Scottish Government's approach to trying to raise people up and all the support and the money and the mitigation that they're trying to do against austerity. I'm not aware if there's any other benefits that the government pays which are paid in the same way. Are you?
I'm not sure, but if it's like specifically for eggs, it's specifically for certain products, that might be a deal between the dairy sector. You know what I mean? There might be a deal that makes it sound cheap. There might be an agreement that these things are nutritionally necessary. So you have this card to buy these specific items. if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a
I
reason
forgot
for
what
it,
the
but
other thing you asked me.
I don't know, it just kind of sits a bit strange with me. Maybe I'm just maybe being oversensitive, but
It's
I don't
difficult
like.
for me because I have no public funds, so
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
get
So
any. You know what I
you
mean?
wouldn't get any of these things. I just always think anything that seems to imply that people are getting a benefit, but they're not being trusted to spend that money for how they think is what their family need, always makes me. It just has a whiff of the feckless poor with it, and I really, really object to that. And I think that's grossly unfair. But maybe there is a good reason for it, and maybe if there's a government minister or someone from the party that or Parliament watching the programme, they'll come back and explain it to us. I'd like them to. But it's tremendously, it's important that the money's been increased, and that's good. And the amount of money that has been distributed over the years is clearly not a drop in the ocean. The Scottish Government is spending a lot of its time at the moment trying to mitigate as many poor decisions by Westminster as possible. And the latest one to come under the spotlight are the need and the call to action to protect Scotland's farmers. The SNP has attacked the UK Government on its failure to deliver on its promise to urgently establish a statutory commission to scrutinise future trade deals on behalf of Scotland's farming sector. The Westminster Government promised to establish a new statutory Trade and Agriculture Commission to scrutinise future trade deals and to ensure that farmers and crofters across the UK would not be undercut and squeezed out as a result of any trade deals. However, amidst concerns from the farming industry that the Australian deal would set a precedent for lower standards and prices for future trade deals, the Commission has still not been established. Commenting, SNP MSP and former sheep farmer Jim Fairley said, "Farmers and crofters are being left high and dry by the Tories as they continue to fail to protect Scotland's farmers from being undercut by trade deals. This is a race to the bottom on food standards, and Scotland's farming industry will be the loser." There are real fears within the agricultural sector in Scotland that the Australian deal will form a blueprint for future deals with America and other countries, posing further threats to the very future of our vital world-class farming and crofting sector. So the SNP have been talking about this for some time, and they are obviously naturally focusing on Scottish farmers and crofters. But it isn't just Scotland's farmers and crofters that are affected by this lack of action, it's farmers across the UK. However, large percentages of the farming community across the UK voted for Brexit. So, Kat, is this an example of the Tory government saying, "Thank you very much for your votes to get us across the line. Now we've got them, we can just choose to ignore you and carry on regardless"?
I think so. I don't think the Tories care about I don't think they care about who they vote for, what promises that they make that are false. I do think that it's important to point out that Brexit was sold to a lot of people as a solution, and whether or not somebody voted for Brexit should not be, should not force them out of business or force them into hunger. And that, I've seen some people go, well, the farmers voted for Brexit, so they got what's coming to them. Well, I tend to believe that people shouldn't always get what they deserve, and I think it would hurt all of us. I mean, I grew up on a farm myself, so I have I've got a lot of patience for farmers, and it's such a hard job that they do. If the standards are lower, it'll be, they'll have to cut corners, do more industrialized farming, which hurts the environment. It just protect the farmers.
Well, especially in Scotland, because the farming industry in Scotland is worth huge amounts of money. And one of the things that Scotland's trying to do, obviously, is make sure that the onshore economy in the future is more important than the offshore economy, especially as we reduce our reliance on oil and gas. And so the Scottish farming industry and the food and drink industry is massive, and it's a huge employer. And not only that, the quality is in Scottish farming is what's absolutely crucial. It's one of the things that really marks out the produce from Scotland. And so the fear that it's not just that they'll be undercut on price. I think the real genuine fear is that quality will be undercut. And if that's part of your brand, if that's part of your offer, that has real serious consequences. in a way that might not be the case in other parts of the UK. So I'm not suggesting for a minute that farmers voted for Brexit, they had it coming. Not at all. I quite agree. You can't hold people responsible always for how they voted. They voted for whatever reason. But it feels like the government in Westminster saying, well, you gave us your vote, now we've got your vote, we don't need to care about you. In that kind of cynicism, what we've come to expect. What I've not been able to find out is whether there is any intention to create this commission. So this is something the SNB have been talking about all summer. I don't know when the commission was meant to be set up. I think it was expected to have been set up by now. Maybe that's something else that Nicola could put on her agenda if she sits down with Boris Johnson this week. What do you think?
I think that'd be a good idea. I think that the news, I think that the press has kind of covered some key issues that she could talk about this week. The farmers and the drug deaths, I think, should be definitely on her agenda.
Yeah, definitely.
And then maybe talking about independence will come naturally after it.
Well, absolutely, because it would make the difference. A consultation seeking the views of people from across Scotland on the proposed Islands Bond has been published. The Islands Bond aims to tackle population decline across the Scottish Islands and provide funding to help people stay on or move to the islands. The consultation will run for 12 weeks and has been launched to ensure that the bond provided is meaningful and works for all the islands. Islands Secretary Mary Goodjohn said, "The Islands Board will help us to deliver on some of the commitments from the National Islands Plan. It's a way for us to address some of the key financial barriers for people who want to live on our islands. Each of our islands are unique, and this consultation will help us understand some of the population challenges across the islands and make sure that we can properly address them. It will also provide information to enable us to set up a relocation support or advisory service and make the move for people as smooth as possible." So the bond itself is a pot of money of £5 million over 5 years, which is suggesting it will allow up to 100 capital grants of £50,000 to families and young people who either want to stay on the island or move to the island to help them set up a business, buy property, or whatever. So it's a lump sum of cash for up to 100 families. So it's not a huge amount of money and it's not a huge number of families. We're not talking about a mass migration to the island. And I'm guessing the consultation, which I haven't been able to look at yet, is asking how would that best be spent. I think it's important, however, that we don't have a kind of one-size-fits-all response, because the challenges facing small island communities like Rum and Egg, for example, are hugely different from those facing somewhere like Shetland, which is actually very prosperous. I mean, Shetland is, after all, the only part of Scotland that has its own oil fund. You might argue doesn't need so much of this money. I think if I was contributing to this consultation, which I might do, I haven't decided, and I think a lot of people who live on the islands would say, you want to make life on the islands easier, fix the ferries, literally in some cases, and fix broadband and connectivity. So what do you think of the initiative, first of all, Kat, and what do you think the islands need to help people stay there, thrive, or indeed move there to create businesses?
Well, I think bringing up the logistics of it is very, very important. I think there's like one more ferry that's in service right now that they announced over the summer. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, it is. It's really hard to hear that. I mean, I don't know what kind of application process this is, but it does seem like there's a lot of different islands in Scotland that have a lot of different needs. Why is this kind of the same? But, maybe it's going to be different I have no idea. But I do think that the people that I know that that live on the islands or that are from, which actually most of them are from Shetland, so it's probably a little bit of a niche thing. But they said they need people who live there and stay there, right? Because a lot of people buy holiday homes and then that clogs up the ferries and everything. I think maybe sometimes getting people out there who are committed to their community, who want to live there and who don't, maybe they'll be the ones buying the homes, and then maybe that will free up some of the ferry space because there won't be as many holiday homes being let where people are trying to get on and off the islands. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of logistic things that I hope that they are taking into really a lot of consideration before they're giving people these grants, because it would be awful if they handed people money and then didn't make it workable.
Well, it is part
Or
of
it
the
wasn't
National
affordable.
Island, the National Islands Plan, which is quite detailed and does look at a number of these issues. But yeah, I think the thing about holiday homes is absolutely correct. I am a regular visitor to the island of Harris, which I love and adore. And I was quite surprised the last time I was there, out for a walk one day and just met a local. And we saw this plot of land being prepared for a massive house being built. And he said, "Oh no, it's not being built by anyone on the island. It's yet another holiday home." And in that, we're just outside Leverborough, which was one of the biggest towns on Harris. And he reckoned that over 50% of houses in that township itself were owned by people who didn't live on the island permanently. And of course, what that does is it means it prices out of the housing market young islanders. And if there's nowhere for people to live and stay, they're not going to stay. They're going to move away. So there needs to be, I think, it's a delicate balance, isn't it, Kat, between islands that require and thrive on tourism, but making sure that there are places for locals to either move to and thrive or stay and thrive. And that includes not encouraging people like me, old ladies like me, who every now and again think, wouldn't it be nice to go and live on Harris and retire? They don't want people of my age. They want people with young families who are going to make a
I
contribution.
think, but I do think that people that want to move there and retire and stay there and be part of the community are people that they want. I think that having some tourists that care about, that love going to Harris, and that, stimulate the economy by staying at a guest house and dining out at the local, whatever's. But it's when people have this like fancy whatever holiday home that they come and they might bring their own food, their own staff, and they do nothing for the local economy except for drive the housing prices up. That's what needs to be avoided. That's what needs to be discouraged. So in that case, I think the stimulus is
let's
good.
not get us started on camper vans and the nightmare that they are and have been over the unlocking of Scotland after the pandemic. Well, the consultation runs for 12 weeks. If you're interested in taking part, you'll find it on the Scottish Government website, and you have, as I say, 12 weeks. And they're wanting contributions from people across Scotland, including mainland Scotland. You don't have to live on one of the islands to take part. Popping over to the United States now, we haven't had a US story for a while, and this is a big one. US senators have unveiled nearly a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package after much delay, wrapping up days of painstaking work on the inches-thick bill and launching what is certain to be a lengthy debate over President Joe Biden's big priority. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was produced on Sunday night and clocks in at some 2,700 pages. Senators could begin amending it soon. The final product was not intended to stray from the broad outline senators had negotiated for weeks with the White House. "We haven't done a large bipartisan bill of this nature in a long time," said Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York. He said a final vote could be held in a matter of days. A key part of Biden's agenda, the bipartisan bill, is the first phase of the president's infrastructure plan. It calls for $550 billion in new spending over 5 years above projected federal levels, what could be one of the most substantial expenditures on the nation's roads, bridges, waterworks, broadband, and the electric grid in years. Senators and staff laboured behind the scenes for days to write the massive bill. It was supposed to be ready Friday, but by Sunday, even more glitches were caught and changes made. Late Sunday, most of the 10 senators involved in the bipartisan effort rose on the Senate floor to mark the moment. Now, one of the things that Joe Biden is known for, and one of the things he promised when he became president, was that he would work with people on the other side of the aisle, and he's been pushing for this. There's been very little sign of any bipartisan agreement on anything since January's inauguration. What do you think the chances are, Kat, of this bill going through in the form which it exists in already?
I think actually the chances are pretty good right now because the weekend session, which is almost unheard of for the Senate, The people that are speaking out saying it's great and that are in favor of it are more the centrist Democrats right now. And the thing that they compromised on over the weekend, which pains me to say, is a lot of the tax scrutiny that they were going to put on cryptocurrency. A lot of that came out of it. So a lot of adjustments have been made to get Republicans to actually vote for it right now. And remember, the budget's coming up very soon. So if they're unhappy about it, they've made enough maybe concessions for people who are more about big business and stuff like that beforehand. And then, the Republicans have we'll hold the budget up as a card rather than like playing it out right now and right here. So Chuck Schumer isn't the kind to like say something he hopes is going to happen. He's going to say something that he's pretty sure of.
Well, right-wing Republicans have already said it costs too much, and yet at $1 trillion, it's about half of what was originally envisaged. And if it gets passed by Senate, then it has to obviously be approved by the House. And Democrats in the House, who tend to be a bit more left-wing, and certainly there's saying left-wing in the context of American politics is maybe a bit silly, but there's certainly a radical streak, if you like, in the current House. And they're saying, well, wait a minute, we want to offset that with what they're calling not just a physical infrastructure bill, but something they're calling a human infrastructure bill, which would look at education, social services, childcare, and they've put a budget of that on 3.5 trillion, and they want that paid for by tax cuts. Now, that's going to be an issue where there's conflict, surely. So is there even a suggestion that the Democratic Congress might actually hold this up happening if they don't get their way with what they're planning to do?
I'm sure that they're gonna be able to make some changes. It's hard to predict these things, but the Senate is always a little bit more centrist than the House. The Democrats have the majority of the House, so hopefully there will be some more things. The thing is that infrastructure really, really is necessary. So, and a lot of the Republicans are in rural areas, and this bill promises broadband in areas where they don't have it and stuff like, very Scottish sounding things. So actually the representatives of a lot of rural areas that would kind of be against it might have to be quiet because maybe the concessions are made more, to help people in their areas. But, I don't think that the Democrats are going to veto it at all. I think they're going to push for everything that they can get. And, I personally applaud them on to try and get more for people in health services and education.
I imagine at 2,700 pages, there's going to be a lot of amendments. And I think I'm right in saying the last time there was this kind of infrastructure investment in the United States must have been the original New Deal back in the 30s, which was set up to help deal with the Depression. So it is a kind of New Deal for the 21st century. It's interesting that we're not really hearing...
That's what Biden wants.
Sorry?
Biden has... The first time I heard Biden say, he wants to be like FDR, he wants to be that type of president, I kind of got offended because FDR is great. He's one of our best presidents. But this is his legacy, and I think that he is going to be pushing as hard as possible to get it.
Okay, so cue fireside chats any day now. Sticking with an international story, the Belarus Olympic athlete Kristina this is a nightmare name to pronounce, Simonauskaya has received a humanitarian visa from Poland upon seeking asylum after she was threatened with being bundled back to Minsk over her criticism of Olympic team officials. Poland's Deputy Foreign Minister wrote on Twitter on Monday that the Belarusian sprinter was in direct contact with Polish diplomats and had been granted a humanitarian visa to the country, which she is expected to fly to later this week. Poland will do whatever is necessary to help her continue her sporting career, he wrote. Earlier today, her husband confirmed to Sky News that he had fled the country and was currently in Kiev. I didn't think it would get this serious. I made the decision to leave without thinking twice, he said. Simonauskaya, I do apologise, was filmed arriving at the Polish embassy in Tokyo today, where she's said to be seeking refuge from pressure by officials to return to Belarus. A sports journalist from Belarus and member of the Belarusian Sports Solidarity Foundation said that she'll be buying a plane ticket to Warsaw for later in the week. The asylum application came hours after the Belarusian athlete was abruptly removed from competition after criticising her coaches for negligence. She wrote on Instagram that they had failed to secure the necessary doping tests for her fellow athletes and then entered her behind her back into the 4x400 metre relay. On Sunday, she was abruptly removed from competition, spirited off to the airport by team officials, but she refused to board the flight back to Minsk and sought police protection, indicating she would probably seek asylum in the West. Kat, it's been quite a long time since the Olympics have been the scene of such a kind of international drama, although obviously often things like the Olympics or other major international meetings of sports people or artists, often in the good old days of the Cold War, triggered this kind of claim for asylum. Should we be worried, however, that it looks like Poland have maybe only extended the asylum because they're interested in her sporting career rather than the humanitarian pressure that she's been put under?
I mean, I was kind of worried when I heard it was Poland just because of the way Poland is. Yeah. So, she has a talent and she had other countries in mind that she was hoping would give her asylum. Germany and Austria, I think she had said, or that she thought Czechia might have given her asylum. But I think, you got to take what you get in that. And also listening to you say what she had criticized him for, doping, that's like a trigger word for the Olympics, right? Just, you don't accuse any country of trying to get around the doping testing or whatever. So I'm just concerned about anybody that's going to live in Poland who can't leave for any reason right now, because they have a fairly worrying regime themselves.
Yeah, and their own record on asylum applications from people who are been fleeing torture is not great, it has to be said. And I don't think people should ever be granted asylum on the basis of their talent or their education or their skills. It should be on their humanitarian right. She does have a humanitarian right, there's no doubt about that. Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, is a nasty piece of work. And there have been literally dozens of sportsmen and women confined to prison, arrested for criticising the government. So she is part of that. And the Belarusian journalist that said that she would be buying her ticket this week has been reporting on that, possibly at risk themselves. I guess I'm worried that it just means when something like this happens and there is a big international focus on the kind of abuse that this sportswoman has had from her government, does it make it even more dangerous for people existing in the country to continue to campaign against the government and make a fuss? Or is it an international spotlight that needs to be thrown on what's happening in Belarus? Belarus, don't forget, are kind of in that waiting room of countries that would like to join the EU. But as we know, the EU doesn't seem to take these things very seriously. If it did, it would probably be kicking Poland and Hungary out of the EU because of their own human rights abuses.
Yeah, they would. I do think it's the latter. I do think that this is something that's very necessary. It probably, we've all been in moments where you have, what do they call it? The outrage, righteous outrage about something. So I think that these things have already been happening. They've been happening. Now the world's paying attention. So she's made a tremendous sacrifice, herself and her husband, her family. They've made a sacrifice for this, but she's not alone. A lot of people have been making this sacrifice and we don't know about it. So I think that this is an important thing that's happened. I won't call it good. It's an important thing. And, I hope it motivates the people in Belarus to do what they can to keep on going.
Well, it's a long time since since the Olympics have been politicised, and the International Olympic Committee really need to take a stance on these things, I think. They've not said very much. As you said, the doping thing is possibly what's triggered what response they have done, because they're so nervous around that. And doping doesn't seem to have been a major issue this year, although perhaps it's been kind of kept quiet. I don't know. Sticking with the Olympics, just as we wind up the programme, obviously Scottish athletes have been doing quite well within Team GB. There's a few big names to be looking for in the next few days if you're watching the Olympics. Laura Muir has the 1500 metres semi-finals on Wednesday. Gemma Reekie, who I absolutely adore for her positivity and the fact that she never seems to get down about anything, has the 800 metre final tomorrow and has a good medal chance there. We've got 3 people with sailing hopes over the next few days: Luke Patience, Chris Grube and Anna Burnett. Deborah Kerr has a medal hope in kayaking coming up this week. Katie Archibald is part of the women's team pursuit in the velodrome. James Heatley has springboard diving medal hopes, and Ailish McColgan, who had such a disappointing run in the 5,000 metres when she was clipped by other runners, has her 10,000 metre final on Saturday and is a real medal hope. So let's keep hoping that Scotland's sportsmen and sportswomen are contributing to Team GB's efforts. Have you been watching the Olympics, Kat? And if you have, what are you making of them?
I have been watching them. They don't always cover the sports that I'm accustomed to watching back in America, so it's interesting. It's a different style of coverage and commentating. I've watched a lot of the gymnastics. I've always loved gymnastics. I'm watching a little bit less of the swimming than I used to, but I'm really excited for track and field to be, all day, every day now. There's always a little bit that I feel like we're in the lull right now, right in between like the big stuff. So, but I'm always glued to the gymnastics.
So
and beach volleyball.
You can't have had very much sleep then over the last few days.
Because
to watch it live, you needed to be sitting up to the early hours of the morning.
Yeah, I've been staying up too late, that's for sure. But I've been watching a lot of it on repeat, and I just won't look at to me, it's just enjoying watching it than knowing who wins right away.
Well, I was very cynical about it going into the Olympics, partly because people in Japan seemed so against it happening. I did think it seemed rather silly. There was going to be no spectators, which has been odd, undoubtedly, and because of the time difference, you weren't going to watch very much live. But, the quality of sport that we've witnessed has been so outstanding. I've really enjoyed it. We've come to the end of the programme. Thanks very much, Kat, for joining me again this evening. I always say this at the end of programmes. It's the usual request or plea for financial support. Broadcasting Scotland is a tremendous outfit. We're a truly independent broadcaster in Scotland, and we need independent broadcasting. So please support us. If you've enjoyed the programme, go onto the website www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register and pledge to support us financially. We've lost a few financial supporters over the year. People are finding the pandemic tough. We've got a new outside broadcasting unit which has just been kitted out, and we hope to be starting to go around the country as we move possibly to an independence referendum campaign later this year or next year. So please, think about supporting us. In the meantime, have an enjoyable evening. I'll be back on Wednesday, and enjoy the rest of Monday evening. Thank you. Good night.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. If I went to BBC Scotland and I said, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a battling stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
About the work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.